Today I'm going to go over how I built this TV console and then ultimately turned it into this TV console. So I originally built this thing about 5 years ago, and it was kind of a rush job when we had to rearrange our family room. Long story short, we wanted a play area and we needed something long and with some storage. So I built this thing kind of quickly and never quite finished it. Flash forward a few years and I was giving it to a friend of mine and I wanted to finalize it before I sent it packing. So let's start by going over the construction in detail, and then I'll go over what I did to fix it up and put the finishing touches on it. The top and bottom of the case are made up of two pieces that are cut to 7 foot 10 inches long and 1 foot 9 inches wide. Each of these will get two dados that run back to front across the entire width for a couple of vertical partitions, and one more dado that stops short of the front by about 1.5 inches. And that's because a pair of sliding doors will go in these grooves that you see here. If we flip it around to the back, you'll see that one side has a 1/4 inch rabbet along the very back for a back panel, while the other side has a 1/2 inch groove that's inset about 4 inches. And this is going to hold a false back panel, so that we can hide some cables and a surge protector out of sight behind it. Next we can bring in the side pieces, which are identical except that this one, again, has a 1/4 inch rabbet in the back for the aforementioned back panel. And let's go ahead and bring those panels in now, and that'll take care of the back. And here you can see that the false back has a large hole cut into it to feed the cables through. And this could be made quite a bit smaller if you wanted. Next we'll bring in our 3 vertical partitions. In the 2 cubbies on the left, we're going to put 3 drawers. The drawer boxes are made out of 1/2 inch Baltic birch plywood, and it's the same style that you see me use plenty of times, just 5 pieces reinforced with glue and screws. And the drawer fronts are going to be made out of solid hardwood, and you just get this little cutout for handles. For the 2 cubbies on the right, I drilled in some shelf pins before I installed them to accommodate a pair of adjustable shelves. And then I used 1/4 inch plywood to make a pair of sliding doors to hide everything behind. On all of the exposed plywood edges along the front, I used a strip of hardwood, and on the sides, some adhesive edge banding. And I'm not a huge fan of that stuff, so I'm going to be replacing that. And then for the original base, I just screwed on a few little feet. And this was supposed to be a temporary solution, but like I said, I never actually got around to making a base. So that's something else that we're going to do in this video. Right. So over the years, this thing's taken a beating from kids' toys being thrown at it, people bumping into it, and for the most part, it's wearing its scars like a champ, except for the edge banding. So the first thing that I did was get a heat gun to remove all that stuff. Once it was off, I sanded away the glue and any finish along the front edges so that I could get to work on making a more substantial solution. To do that, I milled a piece of 5/4 inch walnut to just a hair thicker than 3/4 inch thick, and then I ripped it into strips that were equally wide. Alright, I know we've seen a lot of drawings already, but let's cut back to one more so that I can show you some of my ideas before we get any further. First I tried a couple ideas with tapered splayed legs, but none of them were really doing it for me. So then I tried out a more simple base, and this felt like it fit a lot better. I played around with the idea of doing some chamfers in the top and bottom moldings, I guess they'd be. And I really liked this bottom version, but the more that I played around with it, I actually ended up working my way back to just keeping everything square in the end. Okay, so back in the shop, here I'm marking a 45-degree miter cut, which I could make over on my miter saw. Next, I could clamp that cut to my case so that I could mark exactly where the other miter cut needed to be placed. And then I could cut that again at the miter saw. So I made the top and bottom front pieces first and got them glued on. And because the moldings only need to wrap around the two sides in the front and not the back, cutting the sides is super easy. You just cut a miter, leave it about 1 inch longer than it needs to be, glue it on, and after it's dry you can just use a flush trim saw to get it even with the back. And then the last thing to do for the molding was flush it up on the top using a router and a flush trim bit. And then sand it lightly, just making sure not to go through the veneer of the plywood top. For the base, I'm going to be using some 8/4 inch walnut, which I'll cut down into pieces that are 1.5 inches wide and 1.5 inches thick. Next, I needed to start cutting my base pieces to length. So to start, I cut 4 legs to 3 inches long. And while I'm doing that, let me take a second to thank Squarespace for sponsoring this video. So back in the day, I used to code my own website. But about 2 years ago, I switched to using Squarespace, and anytime that I need to update my page, I'm super thankful that I did. Now I always recommend it to people, and I haven't heard one person complain yet. And I think the reason for that is because it's just super simple and the outcomes look great. They have a bunch of awesome looking templates that are perfect for any kind of website you might be dreaming up, be it a personal portfolio, an online store, or something for a brick and mortar like a restaurant. And if you ever need assistance, they have great customer service, which I can personally vouch for. So no matter what you're looking to do, they'll be there to help you do it. And best of all, right now you can start a free trial by visiting squarespace.com/4eyes and save 10% off your first purchase when you use the offer code 4eyes at checkout. So if you're thinking about starting a website, or even if you have an existing one, you owe it to yourself to at least give them a look. Alright, thanks Squarespace. Okay, so once my legs were cut out, I marked them up so that I knew where each one would ultimately reside. And then I clamped some of them in place so that I could mark out the length I'd need each stretcher to be. Once I was happy with the 4 outside stretchers, I cut a few more that are going to go between the 2 ends. To join the 4 legs to the 4 outside stretchers, I used some dominoes, and then clamped them up with a long strap clamp. For the center pieces though, I used some pocket holes, just because it was easier to position them exactly where I wanted them. On 2 of the center stretcher pieces, I mortised in some figure 8 desktop fasteners, and this is what I'm going to use to attach the base to the cabinet. And in this shot here, you can see that I glued on some cheater blocks to keep the center from sagging. And you'd have to get really low to see these, plus they're pretty much obscured by shadows. So I really recommend something like this for any long spans where there could be a lot of weight. It's funny that I never felt like it was worth the time to finish this piece during the 5 years or so that we used it. Yet, as soon as I'm giving it away, for free mind you, it becomes this urgent matter. And maybe I should take that as a lesson. They always say, treat others the way that you'd like to be treated. But for some of us, perhaps a more beneficial piece of advice would be treat yourself as well as you'd treat others. I'm sure I'm not the first person to say that. Thanks for watching.